Behold a world bathed in night, a lusterless, cold, sweltering desert of shadow. Damp darkness howls, wending through tortured spires and surging over tempestuous seas. No life shelters here, nor has it ever. The primordial mass is bleak, inert. Witness the kaleidoscopic detonation as it ruptures the fabric of space from outside, bathing the earth in sickly light like an abortive sunrise. Indiscernible hues scintillate in the once empty sky, a brief star whose implausible illumination shatters reason by mere being. Feel the darkness, tangible as a cloak, covering the world once more, save for the impact crater, shimmering with slowly evaporating silver radiance. Within the pit, a dead hulk slowly cools, its ablative coating scoured away. Dread incubates, hungry tendrils stir in the dark. The Emperor, the Astral Plane, 1492 DR. Colloquially known as Mind Flayers, Illithids universally elicit images of horror and fear in the minds of surface dwellers and underworlders alike. Illithids shock and repulse other races due mostly to their practice of cephalophagy, otherwise known as brain-eating. This abominable habit has such power to appall that the saying, "the Flayer hasn't eaten yet," was coined centuries ago to convey hope in the face of near impossible situations. Whence came Illithids? That is the question. As far back as credible histories recall, these fearsome creatures appear. In fact, ancient texts suggest a truly ancient Illithid heritage, of which the common Mind Flayer itself seems unaware, or at least unconcerned. Crumbling stone tablets unearthed beneath the ruins of Sargon convey confusing and possibly apocryphal information. Sages came to the conclusion that these tablets represented Sargonian attempts to foretell the future. The tablets all had a resemblance of an eyeless Illithid head carved into the tablet. One interpretation of the tablets from sages is that at some ungodly distant time, Illithids, or their evolutionary precursors, appeared in the continuum from elsewhere. The fearsome images suppled on the tablets suggest that the point of origin for the Mind Flayer ancestors was a terrible realm far from our own, from which even the merest contact negatively affected our own space-time. Illithids used this terrible realm as an intermediate step to our own continuum, a dangerous path to greener pastures, as it were. A race of bastard children, hidden beneath the world by their progenitors, refused to go gracefully into oblivion. Instead, marshalling their strength and bound together by their mutual hate for their creators, they mastered mentally latent powers resulting from their mutant heritage. Led by the strongest minds among them, Illithid and Lugrai Bosk, the mutants rose unbidden and utterly destroyed their creators. These creatures took the name of one of their heroes and spawned the Illithid race. Excerpted from the Astromundi Chronicles, Elminster, the Sage of Shadowdale, 1492 DR. Sages have pointed out that the entity called Lugrabosk was a proxy of the Illithid god Ilsensign, this being embodied their ideals of mental prowess, unlimited knowledge, and willful dominion over all other life forms. Despite the dearth of corroborating histories, it is clear that Mind Flayers once held incredible power. Never again has a single force so threatened the cohesion and process of the entire cosmos on a grand scale. Entire humanoid populations were exterminated in the course of feeding the Illithid appetite. The energy of suns was rechanneled for works of interplanar conquest. Whole planes were set aside for slave races, whose only purpose was to serve every Illithid desire as beasts of burden, military fodder, and livestock. The discerning listener might rightfully wonder how such an incredible empire, once established, could ever fall. The enfettlement of thousands of thinking races seems a difficult barrier to overcome, especially when these very slaves filled the ranks of invading Illithid armies that conquered yet more populations. There is, however, a philosophical principle which applies. When something manifests itself to absolute boundaries, polarities often reverse, and the manifestation flips over to its opposite. In this vein, when it seemed that absolutely every race would finally fall to the Illithid Empire, and that Mind Flayer fortunes were at their absolute peak, the very slaves upon which the Mind Flayers built their empire rose up. Today, we delve further into the tendrils of the Mind Flayer race, understanding this ancient empire further and discovering more mysteries thought lost to present day. Illithids possess psychic powers, the ability to call upon inner mental resources to change and manipulate the environment without recourse to physical effort. Mind Flayers can mentally examine, confuse, and control other minds with their own fearsome intellects. In rare cases, they can instantly travel between two locations using pure brain power. These and other powers are known collectively as psionics. At least two schools of thought exist regarding the true nature of psionic abilities. One philosophy has it that psychonicists initiate their mental effects using energy resident within the mind itself. The other position argues that, while the mind initiates and shapes the psionic effect, the energy of actualization stems from an extraneous source. If psionics effects truly begin and end in the mind alone, then psionics remains completely divorced from magic and spells. Psionics ignores magic, like opposing beams of light. Mind Flayers have access to the psionic attacks in forms of Ego Whip, ID Insinuation, and Mind Blast, which is unique to Illithids. Ego Whip assaults the target's individuality like a glowing whip, slicing open the wells of inferiority and worthlessness buried deep inside all creatures. This dazes the target, where they feel their sense of being lost to them for a period of time. ID Insinuation is akin to a mental battering ram. It bursts the walls separating primitive needs and an ability to feel compulsion to attack the Illithid. Mind Blast, the infamous Illithid attack that frightens all who know of its power. A massive wave of power washes over the target and stuns the brain. The Mind Flayer almost always uses this time to grapple and devour the target's brain. Besides the general psionic powers possessed by every Illithid, these creatures have many psionic abilities unique to their race. Mind Flayer. Psionic masters develop disciplines and charge the elder brains with their guardianship. The elder brains in turn continue to pass on such knowledge from one generation to the next. An ability known to the mind. Flayers as collapse time allows them to crystallize time from the continuum, forming a dollop of thick, gooey material called quintessence. This gooey material shimmers like a silver mirror from some angles, but is transparent from others. It brings a cool numbness that slowly fades after contact with the skin. Objects sealed within quintessence are protected from the effects of time. In practical terms, they enter a form of stasis. This is universally used as a way to keep brains intact if a brain jar is unavailable. Microcosm is where a Mind Flayer can plunge its target into a private world created from the victim's subconscious fantasies. While they maintain this power, its target's senses no longer convey stimuli from the real world. Instead, the target's own mind overrides their senses and fills in the details of a pleasant fantasy world. Mind Flayers hate undead, as they cannot feed or get sustenance from them. Thus, Mind Flayers have developed a psionic attack to sever the target undead's ties to the negative energy plane, thereby destroying it. While certainly not the only interest of Illithid engineers, psionically empowered devices are the answer to the magically enchanted tools often utilized by thrall races. What Mind Flayers lack in spellcrafting, they more than make up for in their ability to produce vast quantities of active mucus from glands within their own skin. Many hours of research allows an incorporation of excess psionically active mucus into newly forged inanimate objects, devices, and even weapons. Imprint psionic circuitry, was a mental discipline that inscribed seals upon inanimate objects or living creatures. A variety of effects can be imprinted onto these seals, depending on the complexity. Several of these effects could include a skeleton key that forms a psionic shape that is able to lockpick any lock. Other possible effects include giving the user incredible speed and reflexes akin to a minor deity, and healing grievous wounds. When large groups of Mind Flayers know they must operate autonomously without contact from an elder brain, they construct transceivers that boost their telepathic range in order to maintain contact with the elder brain. To operate the device, a single Mind Flayer occupies the hollow eggs, while 8 other Mind Flayers enter each wading pool and concentrate their telepathic ability up through the appendages and into the egg. The Mind Flayer inside the egg then channels the combined and amplified energies of the other Mind Flayers and sets up a link with the elder brain. Some communities of Mind Flayers are not bound to subterranean depths. Rather, these creatures inhabit the dark spaces between worlds. Such Mind Flayers generally view world-bound Illithid communities as rustic, but necessary to further plans. Some world-bound Mind Flayers, on the other hand, view their world-hopping relations as rash creatures, ungoverned by practical considerations. Whatever the truth, the ability to travel between worlds is imparted by a series of spell-jamming helms. These devices appear as a series of linked seats with recesses for head, arms, legs, and feet. Series helms are solidly attached to a large vessel capable of carrying an Illithid crew and cargo. When Mind Flayers occupy every seat in a series helm, the creature's combined psychic power is drawn out by the device. It is then amplified and precisely directed so as to provide enough motive power for the vessel to rise up in the air and exit the atmospheric envelope of a planet. To truly understand Illithids further, it is first necessary to comprehend how their bodies and minds function. These creatures share a few physical attributes with other humanoid races, but portions of their anatomy are totally alien in makeup and composition. Mind Flayers dress in flowing dramatic robes and cloaks, and they often sport high-flaring collars and dark hats. Decorations adorn their clothing, most often interpreted as signs of death and despair by their victims. These accoutrements actually signify individual achievement in the psionic sciences and proclaim an Illithids faction within its own community. Unlike most other humanoid races, Mind Flayers completely lack the ability to sense odor in their environment. Their psionic capacity somewhat compensates for this missing sense, though it remains a weakness sometimes exploitable by clever opponents. The eyes of a living Illithid are featureless and white, similar in appearance to blind cavefish that have evolved away from the need to register visible light. This comparison, however, is inaccurate. They actually possess supernormal visual capacities in the infrared spectrum. The pale sclera coating their eyes screens out all visible light, but allows infrared light easily. The sclera also insulates their body heat from its infravisual organs. Thus, Illithids always perceive the world with infravision, whether in the dark or in bright light. A Mind Flayer does not possess exterior ears like many other humanoid races. Instead, it relies on small, ridged holes on either side of its head. These fleshy ridges surround each auditory canal and function in a limited degree like real ears. They collect vibrations over a wide surface area and channel them down into the canal. However, no Illithid can ever achieve the acute auditory perception of a creature possessing true ears. The Mind Flayer possesses 4 to 6 tentacles for brain extraction, and their mouth includes several rows of horny teeth, set in a circular, jawless mouth beneath overhanging tentacles. The absence of vocal cords, as well as the lack of an oral cavity suited to shaping speech, renders Illithids mute. The moist, supple skin includes a thin layer of mucus preventing the epidermis from passing oxygen. Mind Flayers possess hands that are quite humanoid in appearance, except for the lack of an index finger. The 3 remaining fingers and thumb possess mauve to red shading. Due to their amphibious origins and vestigially webbed feet, Illithids are quite adept in water. Ceremorphosis is the eerie transformative process wherein an Illithid tadpole becomes an adult. Race selection for this process depends upon the presence of vital neurochemical in the victim's brain. These neurochemicals act as essential chemical cues for the initiation of ceremorphosis. Some of the unacceptable races include halflings, dwarves, Darrow, Duergar, gnomes, centauroids, giants, and Kuo-toa. These selections are often chosen from the healthiest specimens in their slave pits, although they do cull victims from Underdark or surface world raids to assure the very best stock. Just like other living organisms, experience brings wisdom, and Illithids that live long enough can expect to reach their race's standard potential within 21 years of their emergence. During their dominion over the vast planar realms, Mind Flayers required servants to assist them in both defense and certain tasks. An intellect devourer is often used as servants for defense and alarm mechanisms for the cities or hives they create. An intellect devourer resembles a walking brain protected by a crusty covering and set on bestial clawed legs. This foul aberration feeds on the intelligence of sentient creatures, taking over a victim's body on behalf of its Mind Flayer masters. Mind Flayers also breed intellect devourers to serve as roaming hunters of the Underdark. The creation of an intellect devourer is often through a horrible ritual, where the humanoid is locked into a chair-like structure and the skull is opened and subjected to a process of ritualistic implantation. As it sprouts legs, the brain becomes an intelligent predator, as twisted and evil as its masters. An intellect devourer consumes a creature's mind and memories, then turns the host body into a puppet under its control. An intellect devourer typically uses its puppet host to lure others into the domain of the Mind Flayers to be enthralled or consumed. Europhions are ropers that have been twisted even further with the implantation of a tadpole into the eye of the roper. Europhions usually lay ambushes in areas where passages become narrow, twisting, and rough, with maze-like passages winding into darkness. About half the time, a Europhian will operate in solitude. The rest of the time, two or more of these creatures work in concert. These groups are much more dangerous. They allow intruders to move past the first, and the last one springs the ambush. Then the others seal off the route of escape. Mind witnesses are beholders that have been stunned by Mind Flayers and brought safely to the brine pool of the elder brain. In this pool, it is converted by ceremorphosis into a mind witness. The process transforms 4 of the beholder's eye stalks into tentacles similar to those of a Mind Flayer, and alters some of the beholder's eye rays. These creatures are now psionically imprinted with devotion to the elder brain and submission to Illithid commands. The primary function of a mind witness is to improve telepathic communication in a Mind Flayer colony. A creature in telepathic communication with a mind witness can converse telepathically through it to as many as 7 other creatures the mind witness can see. Mind witnesses have been known to ally with planar beings such as demons, shifting their worldview and changing their thoughts to that of their new masters. Brainstealer dragons were dragons that had undergone ceremorphosis. Once they were stunned, these creatures were extremely rare due to the extraordinary task of taking down a dragon. Brainstealer dragons have 4 tentacles in place of their usual heads. Like ordinary Mind Flayers, they possess 2 white, lidless, white orbs for eyes. Brainstealers possess conniving personalities. They will influence the minds of underworld denizens to grow their horde. A few of these beasts have whole Illithid communities under their control as they grow in power and psionics. Their origin has been lost to sages, but some accounts believe they were created as a part of an Illithid breeding program. Like other sentient races, Illithids claim deities specific to their ideologies. Cosmological mysteries being what they are, it is nigh impossible to determine the origin of these divine and diabolical beings. The more disturbing question is one of the relationship between the Mind Flayers and their deities. Mind Flayers seek to join the Elder Brain, but that does not stop them from revering certain outer planar entities, as they hope to get something in return. One of the main Illithid gods is known as Ilsensign and resides in a subterranean realm below the standard material plane. This god is a mental and spiritual entity manifesting as a disembodied brain of lambent emerald. It trails with countless ganglionic tentacles throughout its cavernous domain and out into the infinite planes. Mind Flayers that honor Ilsensign offer up scholars or sages currently kept captive in order to pay homage, and they dedicate a small number of their own kin to the priesthood of Ilsensign. Even with devotion, Mind Flayers seem more interested in developing their own personal psionic powers than in channeling the power of another, even a deity. If an Illithid priest can prevail upon their god's favor, it can gain answers to difficult questions. There is almost no place in the planes inaccessible to Ilsensign's neurons. This knowledge is all the Mind Flayers seek from this god, and as long as it upholds this promise, then a few Illithids will maintain worship. Illithids know that only through the domination of others can they actualize their inner desires, needs, and future goals. The rite of adulthood requires a rite of domination of a new slave in the form of ceremorphosis. The relationship between Mind Flayers and their thralls is quite intimate. In fact, Illithids suffer when their thralls die from age, disease, or conflict. This control gives the being a sense of purpose and connection through domination that they are so eager to maintain. The community of Mind Flayers view any individual unable to secure mental slaves as flawed. Illithids are organic beings that possess emotions. To a non-Illithid, it may appear that Mind Flayers are emotionless beings bent only on the domination of other creatures. However, Illithids feel anger when cheated on their goals, fear when faced with rebellious thralls, happiness after the delightful gestation of a tasty brain. They feel hatred for those who would deny the Illithids their right to rule, disgust for those who would parley with thralls on an even basis. They feel sadness upon learning of the death of a compatriot far from the mental embrace of the Elder Brain. The emotion Illithids most often experience is frustration, as their racial goals of domination and mastery remain unrealized. Such a constant undertow of discontent subtly colors every other emotion, thought, and action. Thus, frustration remains one of the Mind Flayers' defining emotions. The Illithid concept of time is unlike that of most other races. To the Mind Flayers, the past is a constant fluctuating medium, an ever-shifting environment accessible only to an Elder Brain. Each community's Elder Brain sifts through the past for useful experiences that might have some bearing on present circumstances. So ingrained is their disregard of the past that Illithids do not possess recorded histories of their communities or empires. Complete reliance upon the eidetic qualities of the Elder Brain, as well as the lack of hard records, may contribute in part to this disregard of the past. The concept of the future does not have the same root meaning for Illithids as it does for other races. To the Mind Flayer, the future merely represents an as yet unrealized portion of the present. This present will invariably transpire according to plans currently in motion, known as the Grand Design. Illithids are ruled by the dictates of the Elder Concord. The Elder Concord has the power to set community goals and arrange for the execution of these goals. They arbitrate disputes between Illithids and take care of all other details important to the ruling of a community. The Elder Concord consists of senior Illithid representatives from each of the recognized factions that exist within the community of Mind Flayers. Its role is to shepherd the community with the Elder Brain, privy to every decision made by the Elder Council. It also has the power to propose courses of action for debate, place tie-breaking votes, and, most importantly, veto courses of action with which it does not agree. Every Illithid community has an Elder Concord. When the goals of more than one Illithid community overlap, the two or more ruling concords in question form a temporary body referred to as the Grand Elder Concord. This body oversees the execution of the pertinent objective. The Grand Elder Concord remains viable as long as its primary goal remains unrealized. Once it achieves these goals, it dissolves. Skeptics suggest that the entire narrative around the Mind Flayer demise rings false. How could a slave race overpower the majesty of the Mind Flayer race? They ask pertinent questions surrounding the questioning of this very question due to the lack of signs of the great struggle. Perhaps the Gith didn't actually win. Perhaps instead, the Mind Flayers moved themselves and their works into the future to avoid being overrun. That theory would explain the Mind Flayers' disappearance and the absence of any ruins from their empire. Few folk take such talk seriously, yet no one can be sure exactly what the Illithids are and are not capable of. Mind Flayers teach us that the stories delivered in the present are usually delivered by those who are the victors. These stories do not always pay homage to the truth, and that in ensuring we seek the truth behind the stories we hear will help us in both knowledge and growth. With these in balance, we maintain both reason, doubt, and open mindfulness. If you have any ideas on mysteries you want us to focus on, then leave a comment. Thanks for watching the video. If you would like to support us, we have both our memberships on YouTube or ad-free content on Patreon. The link is in the description below. Like and subscribe. See you all on the next video.